Good evening, everyone. It is the last day of the second to last month of 2022, November 30th, 2022. It's 9 p.m. on the East Coast. It's 7 p.m. out in Wyoming. Welcome to another titillating episode of Foundations of Development with Professor DeNobili. I am your host, Professor DeNobili. Today we will be discussing Carl Jung. That will be our topic this evening. I am in those days where all I'm really doing is spending every night at the gym to try to lose weight before the holidays so that I can gain them all back during the holidays. That's usually how the vicious cycle goes. And then you go back in January to try to lose it all over again. So, with that said, let's get to our to-do list. So, first thing, if you haven't done so already, course evaluations, please get them to me. I'd really like one. Also, your final reflection paper, which I'm going to be discussing on the next slide. If you still owe me your informed consent form from the research survey, please get that out to me as soon as you can. We'll briefly look at the roadmap. This week, we're going to look at Jung. And then next week, for the extra credit module, Maslow and the Humanitarians. And then it's your final exam. We're done. We've made it, guys. We've made it all the way to the end, and we thought we weren't going to make it, but here we are. So the reflection paper, it's this slide. Haha, it's not the next slide. I copied and pasted and forgot to take out the next. So the final reflection paper, you can't get an A in the course without one, so please do it. What I would like to do is, let's see if I can X out. I want to briefly go over the template. So I sent you the template. This will probably be the longest part of the entire presentation. I really want to embed tonight's presentation with the reflection paper as it's your biggest assignment in the course. So I provided this template with the title page. It's pretty, just plug in your information as it says here. Just delete anything from the brackets once you're done, once you've used it as a setup guide. So you have the title for your reflection. You simply copy and paste it like you would in any APA reflection. As I've said earlier in the semester, I want you to write an abstract to get the practice of you writing an abstract. Abstracts are the last thing you write, even though it's the first thing you see. It's the last thing you write. So effectively, if you haven't done your paper yet, I would skip page 1 and then come back to it. However, I'm just going to explain it at the beginning here. So this section is no more than 250 words in length. You're going to find out at the end of the template that the abstract does not count in the word count of the paper. So it's no more than 250 words in length. The reader should have a good idea what your reflection is about in those 250 words or less. The abstract should provide the purpose and context of your reflection. The abstract is an overview that provides the reader with the main points of your reflection, though it is not merely a listing of what the report contains. It is a summary of the essence of your reflection. For this reason, it should be crafted to present the most complete and compelling information possible. It is not a detective story building suspense as the reader hunts for clues, and should not be vague or obtuse in its content. Include why the reflection was done, the basic reason you chose your theorists, not like I wrote this because Professor DeNobili said I had to in order to get an A in the class. That's not the point of the abstract. So just type the basic reason you chose the theorists, the specific purpose or objective of what you want to share in the reflection, and the scope of the work if that is relevant. Don't make references to material in the text nor lose the message by trying to put everything in a sea of words. As I said before, this is the last thing you write. A good abstract is complete, concise, specific, self-sufficient. It considers what the reader will encounter in the reflection. So don't worry if you repeat some things that are in the paper. That's kind of the point. The whole point of the reflection is like, in a nutshell, in 250 words or less, can you tell me what your paper is about? That's why it's the last thing you write, because if you try to write the abstract before you write the paper, you may not end up writing about everything you wrote in your abstract. So that's why it's the last thing that you write. It states the overall results of the reflection. It avoids vagueness by stating interesting but relevant specifics. It uses past tense because your reflection was already written. It's informative. It's self-sufficient. The reader should have an overall understanding of the reflection, but does not refer to the body of the reflection itself. Also, you should not be making references like in-text citations. That should not be in your abstract. That's only in the body of your text. The instructions before the arrow are 253 words. So from here to here is 253 words. So that's about the length of your abstract. It should be that or less. Which brings us to our review of literature, which is the second part of an APA paper, which you're using this as your reflection. So you're going to see here, this is a reflection, but I wanted you to set up your reflection as an APA style paper because this is the largest assignment that you're going to write. Briefly introduce your 3 theorists that you chose from the course that you feel will have the greatest impact on your future career as an educator or otherwise, and broadly explain why you chose them. As this is a reflection, you can use the I voice, even though in a traditional APA paper you wouldn't. But because I'm telling you to reflect, you can use the I, me, my approach, the voice, first person point of view. And then for the headings for each section, that's why it's in bold. You put the theorists as the heading for each section. So just set them, keep it simple. Theorist 1, theorist 2, theorist 3. Specifically explain why you chose theorist 1. You should quote the textbook at least twice in this section. Make sure you follow APA formatting for in-text citations. Avoid using direct quotes. According to APA format, direct quotes should only be used when the author makes a statement in a unique way. The use of paraphrasing should be used to develop your reflection. So try to paraphrase as often as you can. They've moved away from the direct quoting because of plagiarism. So just try to paraphrase as much as you can. Again, theorist 2, explain why you chose theorist 2. You should quote the textbook at least twice in this section. Theorist 3, you should quote the textbook twice in this section. Insert the name of your favorite teacher or professor. You will not get extra points if you put me, but hey, if you put me, I would be flattered. But specifically explain why this teacher or professor is your favorite. Did they exemplify one or more of the above theorists you chose? If not, which of the other theorists did they exemplify from the course? You should quote the textbook at least twice in this section as well. As you notice, I am not asking you to have 100 different references. I want you to really demonstrate that you've read the textbook, you understood the material of the textbook, and that you're able to synthesize and give a coherent reflection here. And then your conclusion, write a brief conclusion about what you learned overall about these theorists and about yourself, both professionally and personally. This section, not including the abstract, by section I mean the review of literature, should be about 750 to 1,000 words. So 3 to 4 pages, double spaced. And then you have your reference sheet. Provide your list of references below if you do anything beyond the textbook. Now, you're not required to quote beyond the textbook, but if you do, list those references here. Also, just to put this into perspective, so you have your title page, that's page 1. You have your abstract, that's page 2. You have 3 to 4, 1, 2, 3 to 4, so 5 to 6 now. That's why I teach English and not math. So now you have 5 to 6, and then you have your reference page 6 to 7. So your whole paper, bare minimum, should be 6 to 7 pages. All right, that is that. And now we get back. That actually went a lot quicker than I thought it would. Now we're going to get back to Carl Jung. Here we go. Jung's depth psychology, as it's known. He's a little bit towards the nature side, and I think he's a little bit towards the nature side because in terms of all of our theorists, everything about him is about the person themselves. But even more than that, the concept of culture is sort of biological in the sense of that it comes from within the individual. That culture isn't necessarily this outside influence developing our personalities. Culture is the collective unconscious, which means we are born with it. I hope that makes more sense when we get to collective unconscious. But the idea of like culture is something that is born in us as human beings, and by culture, the culture of being human, not necessarily your specific culture. However, we will also see how different cultures from around the world, according to Jung, are part of this collective unconscious, which connects them as human beings. So in a way, there's a unique one culture of being human, which is part of that collective unconscious. Little out there. However, Jung is probably one of my favorites in terms of the psychologists. So here we go. So why study Carl Jung in a class like this? He gave us the notion of personality types, type A, type B. We're going to get to that later on in the course. Lecture. I'm going to get to that later on in the lecture. He saw energy as spiritual rather than sexual. We're going to learn that was the he was a student of Freud, and this is what broke them up. That he saw the driving force of man as being more spiritual rather than sexual, as Freud saw it. After all, if libido remits, what else drives us? Like the way that Jung saw it is that, yes, sexuality is a very strong force in the life of the human being, but it's not the number one force that drives us through our lives, because at some point in our lives, in many points in our lives, our driving force, the thing that is making us go day in and day out, isn't necessarily sex. That's how Carl Jung saw it. Theory provided fertile ground for follow-up research. Many modern theorists, as we're going to see next week with the humanitarians, there's a lot of people who ran with Jungian theory. His conception of the psyche explains so much. We'll get that today as well. It can help to understand where our children are, not where we want them to be, as we've been saying all throughout this course. Our job as teachers isn't to create the children as we want to create them. It's to help them become who they want to become as they grow up. He fits nicely with Erickson's 8 stages, particularly the ideas surrounding midlife, as in like the midlife crisis, as was covered in the Crane book. And he thought differently about, excuse me, what is normal and abnormal. Wow, I don't know why I'm just tired this week. Anyway, here is Carl Jung. He kind of looks like a Marvel hero right here. But anyway, Carl Jung, born 1875, died 1961. Definitely a little bit later than Freud, but obviously overlapping. He was born in Kessel, Switzerland. He reported a very unhappy childhood, a lot of tensions between his parents, and he became something of a loner because of that. He had painful dreams and daydreams, which made him take refuge in the family attic, which kind of begins his whole theory, as we've said before, with a lot of our theorists. A lot of personal tragedy and personal experience kind of dictates where they begin their study of their theory. He earned a medical degree and specialized in psychiatry. He was attracted to Freud's conceptualization of the personality and the id, ego, and superego, and builds off of that in his version of the psyche. Became acquainted with Freud, but later they would part ways very angrily when they would debate what the driving force of man is. And he basically told Freud off and said, "Listen, man, it can't be all about sex. It just can't be. There's just so much more to life than sex." And Freud was like, yeah, "Goodbye." And apparently they never spoke again. I could just imagine, having a conversation with a friend of mine and just being like, "Dude, everything's not about sex. Come on." And, meaning has to have some level higher than sex. And then my friend telling me, "We're never talking ever again. You could goodbye." But that's basically what happened between Freud and Jung. And yeah, the rest is history. Here we go. So Jung's interest in the paranormal. So in medical school, he reported having parapsychological experiences. So, for example, the unbidden breaking of bread and the movement of table objects. He reported that there was a piece of bread, I guess, in his dorm room, and it broke without being touched. And objects on the table would start moving. And he became so enraptured by this that he based his dissertation on the exploration of these events. And he saw this life energy as spiritual, of a spiritual dimension. And not everything is driven by the need to procreate, but rather by an inner need for meaning. We are what we do. In other words, how you do anything is how you do everything. He saw people's view of reality as perceptual, not as it is or maybe, but as they perceive it to be. Another expression is, perception is reality, and not necessarily that all perception is reality, because as we know, there are things in life that just are, and sometimes people's perceptions are just off. However, there are many things in our lives where how we perceive them, to a certain extent, is our version of that reality. And that's where Jung is talking about here. He's not talking about, for example, if it's negative 40 degrees out and you're like, man, it's so hot outside. Like, there's something wrong if you think it's hot and it's negative 40 degrees outside. He's talking about, uh, you know, like these parapsychological experiences. To a certain extent, if you see the spiritual, you're perceiving the spiritual. To a certain extent, that spiritual energy is reality to you. Somebody else may not perceive that spiritual energy. That spiritual energy is not reality to them. That's where he's going with that, about perception being reality. Such perceptions are the results of introjections and what he would later term collective unconscious. Introjections, you'll see, it'll make more sense when you see the picture of the psyche. These are things that are brought into our perception from outside sources, namely our primary caregivers, our community, and things like that. And we don't question it, and it becomes part of our collective unconscious as individuals. He wasn't sure how else to account for many things we all report as common, and he becomes interested in symbology. Another one of those words that's going to trip me up this semester. Symbology, which many of you probably have heard about. Archetypes. Whether if you had a really good English teacher, not to shout out the English teachers, but the Jungian approach to or the archetypal approach to literary criticism, probably one of my favorites, because it's so easy to wrap your head around. I tend to teach the Jungian approach to middle schoolers and like ninth graders, like early on in literary study, because it is so easy for them, like, to wrap their head around mythology. That meant, like, we have these mythological symbols all throughout different cultures. And I think that lends itself to the credence of this collective unconscious, and I'll speak more to it when we get there. Something that would seem very complex, young kids seem to like, oh yeah, I get that. You know, a star, it represents different things in different cultures, and they're able to like identify what those different things are and how they're similar throughout different cultures. I think that it lends itself to some of this of Jung's credence to this collective unconscious. Jung's interest in symbology is based on the then nascent field of cultural anthropology, which I personally am fascinated about. I always like learning about different cultures, but not only about what those cultures are, but how how cultures overlap with each other, especially, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, the commonality, the work of Johann Bachofen, the commonality of symbols across all cultures, and how cultures that had no contact with each other yet have very interesting commonalities with each other. I'll get to that a little bit later. Various symbols, what do they mean to you? There's the star, the circle, waves, trees, the halo. In many cases, like, a lot of us in a society that has been dominated by Christianity, let's say, for that 2,000 years, overall, there a lot of these symbols may have a Christian undertone to them, and yet no, there's multiple cultures that also have these symbols in them, whether they're pre-Christian or post-Christian cultures, and they may have slightly different but common meanings to them. Jung believed that archetypes, as he called them. Like these are archetypal shapes, archetypal objects, have no form. So symbols were developed to give form to the unformed. So, for example, love. The archetype of love, like love is an abstract idea. So many cultures use the heart as a symbol for love, for a symbol for emotion. Um, and from those symbols, we're going to get in the next slide, we get to words. Um, Symbology gave way to words, the word association test, for example, the idea that words carry meaning. And if we remember Vygotsky, mediation starts to differentiate that meaning between words. Jung developed the idea of the complex. Don't confuse this with the Freudian complex, which is that, oh, we got a nervous complex. Oh, no, it's not that type of complex. These are talking about commonalities of symbols. Complexes developed based on the meanings delivered to us. If we go back to the concept of, or in this case, we'll say the archetype of a dog, we learn what a dog is. And then we create a dog complex, that anything that's similar to a dog becomes part of that dog complex. So a dog is a dog, a cat is a dog, a deer is a dog, a bear is a dog. Because for a little kid, 4 legs, furry, and walks. Like they're all dogs. So there's this complex, this dog complex, this symbol of what a dog is. Maybe it's better. Maybe a better way of putting at it is, when we interact with our primary caregiver, which is usually the mother, we start to create this archetype of what a mother is and what a mother should be like. And in many cases, what a feminine mother should be like. And then we create this complex of mother femininity. And then all of a sudden, anything that's similar to that gets put into that complex. We've heard the word schema earlier on in the course, very similar to that. And in this case, it's just whatever is similar it gets put in that box. That's my mommy box. Don't mess with my mommy box. Don't all of a sudden come up with a new mommy, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, I thought I knew what a mommy was. That's kind of like what the complex is. And as we know with mediation later on, we start to understand that there are different approaches to not only parenting but motherhood. Like there's different ways of being a mother, and we learn that through mediation. We learn that over time. Introjections are what we accept unquestioningly. I'm going to look further into that on the next slide. He studied many cultures and found similarities. There's evidence that he went through Wyoming on his way to southern Colorado and New Mexico to study indigenous tribes in North America. Those similarities gave rise to the conceptualization of the collective unconscious, literally, that we are born with this unconscious that connects us to all humanity. If any of you know about Taoism, which is an ancient East Asian philosophy, you probably heard of the yin and yang, the circle, the black and white circle that's supposed to be moving. That's a Taoist symbol. And in Taoism, they talk about the way of the Tao. The Tao, one ways of experiencing the Tao is this collective energy that unites all of humanity. If any of you Star Wars fans out there, they would call it the Force, that the Force is this underlying energy in the universe that connects all of humanity. That is the collective unconscious, according to Jung. This idea of we are born into this concept of being human, and we are connected to one another in this collective unconscious where we're kind of like pre-programmed. If you remember from earlier on in the course, that's why he's closer on the nature side. We're kind of pre-programmed with certain things. that we unconsciously learn, not so much from an outside influence, and we unconsciously learn it from the outside, but where we were born into it. We were born into a lot of these understandings from a collective point of view. It is his most controversial point in his theory. A lot of psychologists could not accept that idea because it sounds really like hocus pocus. But that's the explanation of it. Uh, Earlier in the course we were talking about like, Mom, why do we cut off the ends of the roast? Because 3 generations ago we couldn't fit it in the pans because we could only own pans, and then generation by generation, we without question accepted cutting off both ends of the roast for no reason whatsoever, even if the pan's big enough for the roast. The younger generations keep cutting off the ends of the roast. That's a physical representation of this collective unconscious, that it's brought down generation to generation. And for Jung, millennia of humanity, human beings, as we civilized human beings, have been around for 5,000 years. And Jung would say that when we're born with the collective unconscious of 5,000 years of human experience. He didn't really go further into explaining how that is possible, but you'll see what I mean when I get to, some things in culture that really can't be explained. The collective unconscious, well, as I said, was Jung's most controversial idea. He looked at the dividing line between the personal unconscious, like this is Michael's unconscious, and the collective unconscious is all 5,000 years of humanity, and that it's rather blurry, gray, and ill-defined. Like, I cannot separate Michael the individual from Michael, one of humanity, that those unconscious states interact with each other. These introductions and archetypes can be inherited. As I said before, we're born into that system. Current perspectives look upon archetypes as constellations of introjections received early in childhood, that these meanings are drilled into us by our primary caregivers, and we just accept them unquestioningly. Those in the collective unconscious include the hero archetype. This is where, when we go back into literary theory, you have the hero, you have the villain, you have the damsel in distress, you have these classic archetypal characters, but they're cultural characters. We have hero archetypes in our cultural backgrounds, whether they're religious heroes or they're cultural heroes or they're national heroes. These are part of our collective unconscious. And it's interesting. Like, I was thinking about this the other day. There's my little side note. I was watching The Crown. And I became so fascinated with these things like that I never learned of before. But like became a part of like the British unconscious, the abdication of the throne by King Edward, the Queen Elizabeth's uncle. And the abdication became such a turning point in the British psyche as a people, that as the generations went down the line, it's like everything went back to the abdication. Like, the abdication changed everything. Like, that's that weird thing of like unconsciously, that's what it became. Or I think of like, as an American, if I'm watching something and I see a documentary about the JFK assassination, I didn't live through the JFK assassination. And yet, if I'm watching a documentary and I'm seeing this history play out, the JFK assassination has such a part of what it means to be American. And this idea of like life right after the assassination, when you hear these stories about like we were in mourning as a nation, and I watch these documentaries, I'm bawling out crying, and I don't think it's because of like, oh my god, this is a sad story. It's like it's part of my identity, my unconscious as being an American, of like that connection to what it means to be an American, of something that was drilled into me unquestioningly, and I just accept it now as an older man. Like, oh my god, JFK was assassinated in the movie. That's not just sad that just because a human being was murdered, but as an American, I connect to that. I think that relates to these archetypes in our unconscious. Um, the personal unconscious would include mother, the alma mater. The alma mater is like uh how we identify with the college that we graduate from, the father, the teacher, the shadow. I always said the shadow knows. No, in this it's the constellation of the don't do's. The shadow is related to shame than anything else. I don't know why I am not allowed to do it, but I cannot. So you cannot. Crane talks about how the shadow is like this opposite identification with yourself. So sometimes the shadow can be oddly positive. So for example, Crane explains it this way: if an individual identifies as being unattractive, they may in their dreams interact with a beautiful image of themselves, which is their shadow. That's how Crane talks about it in the book. So here it is, uh the infamous Jungian psyche drawing. So I'm gonna try to keep this as quickly as possible, because I could go on for hours about this because there's just so much here. So you have the id, which is deep in the unconscious layer. This should sound familiar from Freud. The ego, which is the conscious layer, and the superego. The ego is our like who we are, our true self. No. The ego is like our physical person. The true self is down here. I don't want to confuse you because we're going to talk about the true self in a little while. By true self, it's like you are who you are in existing in the world. The true self for Jung is the concept of your personality, of your true self. So I don't want to confuse you with that. The persona is a mask that we put on that covers our ego. Um, the persona may change depending on our situation. So I have the persona of son when I'm with my mother. I have the persona of brother when I'm with my sisters. I have the persona of teacher when I'm with my students. Depending on my situation, my persona may change. And then you have the subconscious layer here with the superego, and then here in the unconscious layer, you have these introjections. Remember, I said before, coming in these introjections of, ooh, mother. This is coming from the world. I've learned this is the archetype of the mother. This is the archetype of the father coming in our unconscious. These are symbols that are coming in as part of our unconscious. The shadow is a different type of archetype, connecting with us within opposites, like they're kind of like opposite archetypes in a way. Now, what's interesting about Jung is he felt that your psyche or your personality is neither male nor female. So biologically, or if we're talking about sex or gender, you will be male or female. But unconsciously in your psyche is neither male nor female. It's androgynous. And part of that, I think, has to do with the fact that as human beings, we connect with humankind with this collective unconscious, and therefore that means that unconsciously we have to connect with both the male and the female, going back to that yin and yang from Taoism. And we have the anima and animus within the psyche. Now, the anima or animus is, again, going back to that yin and yang, it's this male or female psyche within us. And typically what happens is that men, for example, naturally will develop their animus. But internally in their psyche, which will be, according to Jung, would say, which would be technically weaker, is their anima, which is their part of the female portion of their psyche. And as you see with Crane, Jung would say that by midlife, they've trekked their whole life developing one part of their psyche, their dominant portion of their psyche. So for men, it would be their animus. And then in midlife, they start having a crisis and realize, all of life isn't about masculinity. I need to now, focus more on the weaker portion of my psyche that I haven't developed, which is my anima. Now, I want you to know, I don't mean that it's weaker simply because it's the anima, because for women, the opposite way of looking at it would be is that their dominant portion of their psyche would be their anima. Their animus would be weak in development, not necessarily weak in strength, but weak in development. And when women reach their midlife crisis, they have the opposite effect where they want to now develop their animus, because they've developed their anima all throughout their life. So that's what Jung means there. And the true self is just waiting to break out. That's what the true self is. We're gonna learn more about it when we get there. And then the dream state. Here, all it's saying is that it's starts in our unconscious, leaks into our subconscious to let us know in our conscious state. We get hints in our dreams of what we need to know. And the difference between Jung and Freud with dreams, Freud was like, oh, your dreams are mysterious. We got to figure it out what it is. And Jung was like, no, man, like if you're having a dream, the symbols in the dream are fairly simple to figure out what's going on in that dream. So for Jung, there was more of a literal interpretation of your dreams based off of what you may be dreaming about. So for example, going back to that anima and animus, if a man is having a dream and all of a sudden in the dream he's interacting with this woman who he's identifying with himself, that might be his anima in his unconscious trying to reach out to him saying, hey man, you've neglected me. We got some things to talk about. So in a way, that woman inside of him is part of his psyche, part of his unconscious identity. And as I said before, according to Jung, our unconscious identity is androgynous. It's neither male nor female, even if our sex or gender is male or female. Our psyche is androgynous, that we have both masculine and feminine psyche within us. Hope I didn't confuse you guys too much with that one. I'm not going to spend too much time on personality, especially since I already feel like, I'm started around 9. It's 9:48. I know I did a lot on the reflection, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But the point is this: for Freud, the unconscious was the repository of repressed emotions. Think of it as like the theater where the id is the dominates the theater. For Jung, the unconscious is creative. It's the creative aspect of the psyche, and later the personality, where we try on these different persona, a factory, if you will. So to Jung, growth became a function of resolving the unconscious, which leads us to our personality types. According to Cattle, there are 16 types or factors. You might have heard of the Myers-Briggs test, introverts and extroverts. The reason why I don't want to spend too much time is because I'm sure many of you are familiar with introverts and extroverts. Crane does a really good job in describing this, and therefore I don't want to spend too much time on this because Crane really does a good thing with this. But all in all, personality psychology is a broad field where Jung is really situated in. And then, as we say, you've probably heard of type A and type B. Again, the slides are here. You can read them. May or may not be tested on this in the final exam, but they're here for you to read. Same thing with Ocean. Again, a 5-factor model. Ocean means openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. May or may not be tested on this. It's there for you to read. Which brings us now moving toward the true self. Jung saw the true self as the original archetype. So the original archetype, the original concept is the true self. It's there since birth. Otto Rank talks about the notion of original trauma, that it's part of who we are from deep within, but we become separated from it through socialization. So think about it like this. If you can remember some of your earliest memories that you can remember, you identify with those early memories because it was part of your true self coming out. If you think about, for example, if you were really young, were you an explorer? Were you a thinker? Were you a social being? I don't want you to confuse it with socialization, but were you a social being in the sense of like the playground sense? And by playground, I don't mean school playground, I mean childhood playground. Were you like extroverted in that sense? Like, think of your earliest memories and what you remember as your most joyous memories as a child. That's your true self. And what happens is that when we get into school age and we start to socialize, we start to lose our true self. Think of it this way. We spend our whole life being taught you should find a career in what makes you happy. And in the end, we're kind of pushed of what career is going to make us the most money because we have to be financially independent. But is financial independence, should that be the be all end all of who it is, of who you want to be as your true self? That's why, and we may talk about this next week with the humanitarians, but this is what Jung talks about. That's why meaning is important, because meaning puts everything into context. Financial independence has a practicality to it. There's a meaning to it, but is that necessarily going to bring you true joy and happiness? Now, I'll put it to you this way. If your true self is an artist, the concept of the starving artist, if your true self is an artist, does financial struggle, does that become part and parcel of your world? I'm going to leave that as a hypothetical. But I would say that's kind of like where Jung is going here. That this idea of socialization pulls us away from that true self that we were really in touch with as children, and an enlargement of the ego and the shrinking of consciousness. Excuse me, sorry. Jung saw the process of moving toward our true selves as a lowering of consciousness, but he also saw it as capable of ebullition. Ebullition is the bubbling up of the true self into consciousness. So as you were saying before, kid, my true self, I'm really exploring this thing of the true self. As we get older, we push it lower and lower out of our consciousness. And then there are moments, excuse me, I don't know why all of a sudden now I got the hiccups. Starts bubbling up into our consciousness, that true self, excuse me. It's a kind of forward memory. In Alice through the Looking Glass, which is the second book in the Adventures of Wonderland series, through the Looking Glass, the White Queen says to Alice, "It's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards." So let's take that apart. What is the White Queen saying? It's a poor sort of memory. Memories are behind us that only works backwards. So a backwards memory is a forward memory. So a memory that's working backwards is actually a forward memory. We could think of this in terms of deja vu. If you've ever experienced deja vu, did I remember this? Was I here before? Or am I coming to a realization of something that I knew beforehand that I'm not realizing until now? So that's this idea of this forward memory. Oh, that brings us to the end, I think, with the explanation of the reflection. It's about this took us about 50 minutes. I hoped it wasn't going to be that long, but it is what it is. I wanted to get this out to you. I'm going to get Maslow and the Humanitarians. That sounds like an 80s band. Oh my God, like Mike and the Mechanics. Mike and the Mechanics, followed by Maslow and the Humanitarians. I want to get that out to you as soon as I can. Luckily, if you haven't read the Jung chapter yet, the Jung chapter is 11 pages. It's really short. And then the Maslow chapter is just as short as well. These last two chapters are really short. I think they work very well to end our course. It is an extra credit module. I highly suggest looking at Maslow from an educator point of view, not necessarily a psychological point of view. Maslow has great implications, especially for modern education, especially in terms of, I know we spoke about social emotional learning in the past, but even more so, Maslow and his hierarchy of needs is essential to modern education. So yes, it's an extra credit module. It'll help boost your grade if you want to, if you're a B and want to get up to an A, if you're a C and we could see what we could do and bumping up your grade. Highly recommend it. I'm going to be talking with, hopefully, I'm working with one of my Viktor Frankl professors who lives over in Idaho, closer to you guys. I'm going to see if I can get her on Zoom next week to record a little talk about humanitarian psychology. She's going to talk a little bit about Maslow and even Frankl, who's near and dear to my heart. And that's about it. It is now almost 10 o'clock on my end, 8 o'clock on your end. No, this wasn't that long. I think it was 7. Yeah, it was 7 on your end, and now it's 8 on your end. Guys, welcome back from break. Let's end off the semester strong. If you're struggling with anything, please reach out to me. GroupMe is there. If you owe something from early in the semester, reach out to me. We'll figure out what we can do. So yeah, if there's something that you're missing and you really want to revisit it, reach out to me. We'll see what we can do. And have a good night. Hope to talk to you soon. Bye bye.